My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Peran Sangran, Guru Peranyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue with Swamiji's teachings on the thought, second principle on thought, continuation of the quote he had on page 18, continuing on to page 19. It's a fairly long quote, but it's very important meaning. So for those who are not here, I'm just going to quickly recap, and then I'm going to spend some time on the second part of the quote, because it's got very important meaning to all of us, those who are in pursuit of this, journey called, life, and better understanding of what life is through the process of self-discovery and self-realization. So in this, Swamiji talks about, how do we find these, this God realization state, and he talks about finding out, how man, discovers this, and he says that when somebody acquires this God realized state, one needs to be, be able to show clear proof, and there are several experiences that one can, describe this. And interestingly, he says that, you see, most people know theoretically, what this God realization is, self-realization, consciousness, all those things. And they would have probably read in the scriptures or had secondhand knowledge of it. But many actually don't put it to practice. And this is where we see that, the practice is very important. And he says that in any experiment, when we do, whatever test, whatever experiments, we need to be able to demonstrate outcomes and experiences. And in that same way, the experiment is on oneself, one's own, personality, one's own mind, one's own intellect. And Swamiji says that if you are practicing, you should be able to experience this. So it's an experiential learning. And what we see here is that in this context, Mahan shows that, although his philosophy is, there are many philosophies, but his philosophy is about practice, and it's experiential learning and the expansion and the convergence from the small I to the big I, or that, limitedness to this unlimitedness. And he says that you have to feel it, you have to experience it. If you have not experienced it, then you've got to do it more intensively, right? So here he speaks about there are several experiences and achievements one should achieve this. So he says that you have to be like Sherlock Holmes. You have to be like an inquisitive scientist. You have to be, really looking like like intensive attention to what is happening in your mind, what is happening to your intellect, what is happening to your memory, as you take this inner journey. When you do externally, you get sometimes caught up with the external things, in all the rituals. But when the rituals stop or the chanting stops, everything stops. But here he says that you have this experience where, when you go through this inner journey and you experience this one, there is a process called hysteresis. Hysteresis means the remnants of that consciousness, the remnants of that enlightenment stays with you for a long time. For some people, it's a short while. For others, it's longer. For many Mahans, it is perpetual, continuous. So in this process, Swamiji then, in this, revelation of his own self, of this unlimited, infinite potential, he then starts looking at, with that universal lens, everything that he sees, sees the material world. When we see the material world with a material lens, which is limited, everything is limited. But when you attain this, as you get closer and closer to that enlightened state, or that state of, the true state of your existence, you see that slowly the material world starts retreating and folding back into that spiritual reality. And you see that whatever that you have been fixated, or whatever that you are so caught up with, all the gravity of the materiality slowly starts waning off. And you see the things that torments you, the things that impacts you, slowly starts losing its power or its glamour, and you start getting into this state of beautiful transcendentality. And in this, he then, in that state of existence, in the state of um, you know amazing enlightenment, the eureka moment, he starts comparing everything in this material world. We have that, the sorrowness, the sukha and the dukkhas. He says that, when the mind is so universal, when the mind is so, have that infinite potential and possibilities, the mind is swift. It is able to adapt. And he says that, in this mind that is so swift and agile, what is sorrow? What is dukkha? You become transcendental. And I went through this the last time, and, love is no more a conditional love. It becomes an unconditional love. The respect for everything, the respect and the gratitude. And I think some of y'all would have read my WhatsApp message on gratitude is the attitude that will lead to our altitude, right? So this unconditional respect that you have, it says that, when you attain that love, is there any disrespect, limitedness? And the same thing with knowledge. When your mind is inspired by the wisdom knowledge, all the knowledge that you get, the things that your mind acquires, the knowledge, some are ephemeral, some are transitory, some are, knowledge that, is important for the contemporary world, the world that is changing. But when you are able to get the wisdom knowledge of Mahans, the knowledge becomes eternal. The knowledge becomes permanent. The knowledge becomes, the wisdom knowledge, becomes so rich that you see that all this knowledge that you have acquired, whether ephemeral or transit, all are unraveling or dancing in the context of this wisdom knowledge. And you say, hey, at that moment I was not very illumined. So my thought was this way: now I'm illumined, I have a better understanding of things. And you see that you don't see it in a limited way, but you see that, now I'm illumined, I have a better insights into things. And you don't see anything as faults or scars or, limitedness or blemishes. Everything becomes, a state of realization and illumination. The same thing, you see that this notion of dwandwas means duality, fire and cold, hot and cold, darkness and light, black and white, all this, positive and negative. So you see that this duality that we bounce, in the normal world, that we bounce between sukha and dukkha, this duality, these dwandwas start waning off. And slowly you see that, both the black and white, both the darkness and the light, both the fire and the coal are all one. It is just different vibrations. They are all from the same, but they all have different frequency. The frequency may be different, but the source is one, right? The same thing he talks about sound and, solitude, noise, vibration, and quietude, right? And again, you see that, this whole idea of, the notion of, vibration, activity in this world, but base of that activity is on that quietude or solitude. So again, we see that, that, and this is very interesting. So one who attains this enlightenment, even in a very noisy world, the mind is quiet. You can put them in the main road where so much noise is happening, and they're still quiet. The mind is quiet. So he says that whether one is in the noisy world or quiet world, they're all the same. So the dwandwas or the duality disappears. And the same thing with primordial Primordial is that which gave rise to everything, sustains everything, and dissolves everything. So everything unravels from it. And he says that, can the primordial ever be destructed? Right? So the body may be changing. So again, this is a very deep insight he gives here. And if one has to read this very, very carefully, right? So you see that the body, take the body, we see that there's a birth of the body is sustained maybe for 70, 75 years, 80 years old. If you're lucky, you go past 80, right? So, and then the body dissolves. So what you see is that the form changes, but within the form, the formless is still, remains the same thing. So he says that molecules and atoms that are assembled into quantum energy that gives consciousness, what we call body, that lives for a while and then it dissolves. And the moment death takes place, it's all dissolved back to its original state. And he says that the essence of the primordial remains the same, right? So has it got any destruction? Can it ever be destroyed? We know in physics that energy cannot be destroyed, right? It can take different forms, from potential energy to kinetic energy. So if energy itself cannot be destroyed, can you imagine the source of that energy itself, the primordial, has it got any destruction? Now, if the primordial is imprinted in our DNA, then the question we have to ask is that what gets dissolved and what does not get dissolved? So here you see that he's now attained that enlightenment and is seeing it in the context of this material world with a divine and universal lens, and is able to put that context more clearly. The same thing with darkness. Can you compare darkness with anything? It neither can be created nor destroyed, right? Light, you can create light. You have a photon, you can create light, but darkness you cannot. It's the formless, dimensionless, infinite possibilities. Is there any comparison to that? It is everywhere, and it's core to our own being. It is asking, is there anything that you can compare? Even the moon, gets its glory with the background in the darkness. He says our life gets the glory in the base of that darkness. So he's now in the state of that enlightenment. Is asking, he's putting a question mark in all this. The why is any equal? He says that, is there anything that is far superior to wisdom? If you acquire the knowledge of the Mahans and the great saints and the wisdom knowledge, and you acquire the spiritual capital, when you acquire the spiritual capital, you acquire all the other 9 capitals that I spoke about in some of the previous lectures on emotional, intellectual, all those different capitals, including economic capital. So, the creative capital and so on. So you see, Swamiji is talking about how this thought, when you practice this meditation and you practice the self-discovery and self-realization, you will experience this. And what the main experience is telling you is that the duality starts dissipating. The forces of duality starts dissipating. The forces of transcendentality starts gripping. So again, we see that, he's saying that all this duality starts disappearing. Moving forward, so that is what I covered last, satsang. Now let's go a little bit more into more, in the state of enlightenment. Swamiji is giving some very important insights here, and one needs to go deeper to really understand here. So he says that I have thoughts. Thoughts is what gives me personality. Thoughts is what gives me reality. Thoughts is what gives me existence. Without thoughts, nothing exists. So then he goes on to start pondering. See, the mind now goes deeper and deeper. This is the kind of introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation one needs to really go deep down. Not just say, oh, think about, okay, dreaming this. No, that's not what he's talking about. When I say introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, it's this line of thought that you're having. He says that no thought. So here's the question. Says there's no thought. So without thought, nothing exists, right? So if there's no thought, nothing exists. If I don't have thought of people, person, time, nothing exists. Then he comes back and asks the question, is there nothing at all? Right? So he says, if there is no thought, is there nothing at all? He's asking this question, right? So then the question is that if there is nothing at all, how is it that I know that there is nothing? When something is there, I know, but I also know that there is nothing. So the knower has always been present in that having something and nothing. So is there really nothing? Right? Very interesting question, right? Similar to, the question that, while I'm awake, I'm aware. While I'm in deep sleep, the whole material world disappears, but I am aware that the material world is not there. But I am aware. In both cases, I'm aware of the material world and I'm aware of the material non-existence of the material world. The only thing that is remaining is the I, right? So here he's asking, this is how his mind is saying, hey, is there nothing at all? To know nothing, you have to know something. You have to know the knower. So again, he's asking, who is this knower that experiences nothing and experiences everything? So it's really like a scientific mind that is probing deeper. Who is this consciousness? Who is this existence, right? So then he goes on to say, okay, great. This knower is present when everything is there, and this knower is present when there is nothing, no thing, no matter and energy, right? Then he says, okay, I get it. So I'm always present, whether the material world exists or not, whether my body exists or not, whether my body is in deep sleep or not, whether my body is in deep meditation. That is why in deep meditation, it is said awakening sleep, right? So, I got this now. So that body which is awakened and conscious is different from that which the knower is, right? So then he goes on to explain the next passage, which is again much more. He says, the thought of one results in everything. Now, what is he talking about here? Right? So he's talking about nothing. Earlier he says nothing, no thing. So when we say thought, it's an experience, a measure of experience. So when we say a measure of experience, we often associate that as measure of experience of something, a person, a place, a time. That's what our mind is conditioned to. But, the mere fact that I am experiencing nothing itself is a thought, right? So that thought, that base thought, which the non-existence of material world itself is seen as a thought, right? And that thought results in everything. That thought of one, the oneness, the formless results in everything, So he says in all, if not thought at all, he says, without this base, without this universal, formless, dimensionless, you can call it experience, measure of experience. Now, I'm not talking about the material experience, the experience of non-materiality, right? So you probably would have seen in scriptures, they talk about action and inaction. I am both action and inaction. This is what that boundary that is referring to, right? He says that everything emanates from this base, which is formless, dimensionless. Then he goes on to say that, there is no expression. So he's asking, this has got no expression, right? So this thing, this formless, dimensionless, doesn't have that expression in the sense of this material expression, happiness, all those different things. Then where is the happiness coming from? And this is really important. He says that if this base is formless, dimensionless, yet gives rise to everything, that's where the secret is. Then the power of generating everything starts not from outside. It starts from inside. So we have a choice of whether we want to make this life inspirational, happy, sad, all those things, right? He says that, and he goes on, if remain in joy of unspoken, this unspoken secret, right? He says that who is the enjoyer? What has been enjoyed, right? Who is the enjoyer? Who creates this? So the knower, knowing and known, and the same thing is that the enjoyer, the enjoying process, and the object of enjoyment. So if you see in all this, what is referring back is that as you go deeper and deeper, that the expression, the happiness, the sadness, all the experiences starts not from outside. It starts from within all of us. That infinite, formless, dimensionless base, if we understand that base, you can generate any experience you want, any inspirational experience, even the most difficult circumstances, you can rise majestically. And he says that inquiring like this, you will find all things come in this world after you. That last statement is very important. Everything in this material world that you experience comes from you. So you start first. You here is referring to is that big I, the consciousness, that universal dimension. You hold the secret to the life that you want to live. The epicenter of knowing, the epicenter of your life starts and ends with you. You see, nobody else, nothing outside can make that change. And this is why in Tamil we say kadavul, embark within. When you embark within, you will experience this thing. All these questions will come. At the end, you realize that, hey, nothing troubles you. The forces of karma doesn't impact you. The forces of materiality doesn't impact you. Anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, all these qualities of this materiality is not who you are, not part of your personality. Everything starts and ends with you. And you have the power to make that difference of how your material world, how your intellectual capacity, how your mindset is, all starts with you. And this is what the last sentence is inquiring like this, you find all things come in this world after you. All this material experience, your whole entire existence starts with you. So again, beautifully he says that in that state of enlightenment, he says, I have experienced everything is unraveling from me. I have the power to make whatever life I want, including that God realization state, the state that though my body is mortal, I am anointed with immortality. Though my body is perishable, I am blessed with imperishability. Though my body is limited, I am, anchored with unlimitedness. And this is what the mindset is. And you're always, he says that when you practice this kind of mindset, you see that your mind, although you are partaking in this material world, your mind will always be quiet. That sense of quietude, that is why he says that the attitude, that leads to our altitude, right? He says that, and what starts off with is that the quietude. Quietude is what leads us to that, aptitude, that, leads us to the altitude. So the quietude is very important, and if everyone learns to practice that, learn to, slowly fold that material world within ourselves and attain that quietude, you see that, our, attitude to life changes. When our attitude changes, it's not about aptitude that determines, our attitude to life changes, and you see that that determines our altitude, how high, how well we soar in our intellect, in our, mindset, in our personality as we become more and more universal. So this kind of probing, thought experiments is what this Mahan has taught me. It is not just about sitting down and meditating and trying to get that unarvu, but the unarvu should give you that quietude, and that quietude should lead to that, the sense of solitude, that oneness, and you see that the oneness gives you that, the sense of, greater, enlightenment, and leads you to a higher level of, consciousness. And this is where you see that intensive introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, leads to your spiritual compass. What does that mean? As I covered in the past, you have very good understanding of all the religious practice, why this is, what is the scientific, behind all this, lighting a lamp and lighting this and, saying your prayers. You have a very good understanding of it. And you also have a very good understanding how you can use this for the inward journey itself. And they're anchored through, both, scientific pursuit and a rational, logical pursuit. And these two pillars are very important to give us a good understanding of the spiritual scriptures and the secrets within the spiritual scriptures that leads us to that path, the inner journey, to the self-discovery and self-realization process. And this is what this Mahan is showing, that how, this pursuit, transforms our thought processes, moving from mundane thoughts, frivolous thoughts, transitory thoughts, ephemeral thoughts, to more deeper, more, sharper, more universal thought. Ultimately, our personality starts transforming to becoming more and more universal. There will be a change in the chemistry or the DNA of our mind process, our intellect, and also our personality. And this is what this Mahan is showing, how one who pursues this will experience this blissful, illuminating, and really a unconditional happiness. You have happiness without anything that is material. You just have that inner joy, and it shows in your face. It'll show in your demeanor, and which I'll cover in the next class. Mahan always says in Tamil, Agatin alagu mogathile, says the inner beauty will show up in the glow in you, how you speak, the positivity, the glow, the happiness, and someone sees you, this person is a winsome personality, right? So, and, not always, mukam muram and, always everything, the whole world is on the bird. They're always, in a state of happiness, bliss, joking, and that is what you see, that your life becomes more, really exciting and enjoy and fun. So with that, this is what the knowledge I have got from this Mahan, that you don't become too serious, Sometimes people say, oh, the more you meditate, you become, no. You become more happy, more joyful. No, you really learn to live life in the fullest possible way. With that, have a great, life through this great Mahan's teachings. And I hope that you too acquire that blissful life and the happy life through practicing this, and you discover your own spiritual compass. Sandosham.